Okay, we're going to look at step one of our reductive printing. And our first step is going to be our first color that's all the way in the background. Now there's two ways to plan your colors out. You can do your lightest colors first, or you could do your background, your largest areas first. The reason we would do our largest areas first is as we carve away, there's less to print in each step. The reason we would want to do our lightest colors first is it's really hard for a very light color to cover a darker color and come out nice. So you kind of have to think about both ideas. So in my example, my background is going to be my lightest color, so I'm going to do that first. Now, before I start doing any carving, I have to decide, am I going to print my white areas with ink, or am I going to use the paper as my white? So in mine, just like in this example, the eyes and the reflection of the balloon are white, and then I printed the light blue background. So I'm only going to carve away the white areas for the example here. So the white areas in this are going to be the bubbles and the eyes. What I also want to do is make sure, and you'll see this as I'm carving, I'm going to be changing different nibs. Usually what I like to do is I like to put a thin outline around what I'm carving if the area allows it. If it's too small, I might not be able to do that. You're going to see me turning this in different directions, so I'm always comfortable. Just remember, as you're carving, you should never carve towards your hand. It could slip and you can stab yourself. These aren't razor sharp, but they're sharp enough to where it will cut you. So always carve with your hand behind it. I'm going to start with a thin gouge here. And again, remember, don't push this all the way down when you're inserting it. Have it up just a little bit. That way, if it gets stuck, you have some room to wiggle it out and make sure things are nice and tight. So as I carve, I'm going to be careful. I'm always going to keep this comfortable. You don't elevate the handle. You always keep this kind of flat. Sometimes you might have to pick it up a little bit in tight areas, but you want to keep it relatively flat. And the blade should always be above the rubber and never diving down into the rubber. You don't need to go too deep. So I'm going to start carving here. Okay, now I have all the white areas carved away that I want to remain white, so I'm ready to start printing my first color. If you notice, while I was carving, I was rotating this a lot. When I was doing that, I was keeping the blade still and rotating the rubber into the blade, which helps makes tighter circles. I'm doing a lot of small areas. When I go to carve out the background, I'm going to be doing much broader strokes. It's a little bit easier. Now, as far as my background color goes, I'm going to start with my plate to hold my ink. And you don't need a ton of ink for what we're doing. You want to keep it at the top of your plate, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to roll the ink onto Now what I want to do is get this ink pile up a little bit so my brayer could reach it easier. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the ink out here. Now, a couple things before I ink my block here. I'm going to put some newspaper under here so I don't make a mess. Also, I want to talk about our registration jig we have here. So what this does is it allows me to get my block in the same place every time, because as I layer the colors, I want to make sure that my paper and block are positioned together in the right place. And this helps keep them in the correct place. And you can see this is numbered. I have several registration blocks here. You want to use the same one every time, just in case there's any minute differences. So what I'm going to do is I will ink this. I will slide this up here into the corner here, and then I will take my paper, lifting it up at an angle, placing it in the corner, then letting it fall onto my block, and then printing. This way, every time I go to print a new color onto here, it's in the same place, the block's in the same place. It makes it a lot easier. Okay, now I am ready to apply the ink to the block. So you'll see what I'm going to do is I'm not just going to stick this in the ink. I kind of want to touch it a little bit, stretch the ink out, and go across and down. Keep lifting, don't just go back and forth. You want to lift and pull, lift and pull. And you want to get a nice layer of ink on the block. And you kind of want to hear that tackiness. You want to make sure that the brayer is fully coated. And then you'll start rolling the ink evenly on the block. You don't want to over ink the block, because that's going to produce a very messy image. It could fill in your lines, especially if you have thin lines. So you want to put a nice even coat of ink on the block. And then I want to print right away. So I'm going to pick this up. Make sure you're not getting any ink on the registration tool. Take my paper, put it in the corner first, and let it fall onto my block. Then what we usually use is a wooden spoon or a plastic spoon. The cooking spoons allow you to apply even pressure across the block, and you print. You don't want to press too hard because it's a rubber block. And you just want to rub in little circles. Make sure you get all the edges good. Get the whole surface of the block. And you could peek at it to make sure you're printing well, but you don't want to lift the whole thing. So what happens is once you lift the whole thing, it will not, we won't be able to place it in the same exact spot. So now we'll peel this. And you can see we have a print. Now, you could see where my pencil indented the rubber a little bit. That's okay because my color is going to change there. But here's my print. So I'm going to print several of these to make sure, in case I make any mistakes. I'm going to put a little more ink on this one to make sure everything is covered. Now you can see the difference between the two blocks, a little more ink on this one, it's a little more solid. You also notice that once I had it set on the block, I gently pulled away from the edge. That way I could get that top edge a little crisper. And that seemed to work a little bit better. So you could print multiple colors. Colors do change the look of the block. And just be careful when you print that you're always setting the block in the same place every time. If you set this slightly different, then go to do your second color, it's going to be off. So you always got to make sure that you're sliding to the edge and pinching and doing the same thing every single time so all your colors line up. So that is the first stage of a multicolored print. I'm going to print multiple colors with this, and then the next video will be showing how to do color number 2.